She was on her knees scrubbing marble that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't hers, carrying a child the world didn't know existed. Kang Min-ho walked through that door to destroy a man. He did not expect to find the wife he'd spent 3 years mourning kneeling on the floor of his enemy's home, her belly round, her eyes wide with a fear that broke something ancient inside him. Welcome to Afrique Love Diaries. Please like, share and subscribe. Seoul at night looked like a city built out of knives, all glass and light and sharp corners, and Kang Min-ho moved through it the way he moved through everything, like the world owed him room. At 38 he ran an empire his grandfather started and his father expanded, a network of shipping, security and shadow business that stretched from Busan to Bangkok. Men who crossed him disappeared quietly. Men who respected him lived long, comfortable lives. But for 3 years, none of it had mattered, because the only thing Min-ho had ever wanted for himself, not for the family, not for the business, just for himself, had vanished on a rainy October night and never come back. Her name was Zara. She had walked into his life the way storms walk into coastlines, uninvited and impossible to prepare for. An American woman, curvy and warm and entirely unimpressed by his money, she had been teaching English at a language academy near his headquarters when they met over a spilled coffee and a ruined report. He married her 11 months later, against his mother's wishes and his lawyer's advice, and for 2 years he had been privately, unforgivably happy. Then she disappeared. No note, no body, no ransom call, just an empty side of the bed and a wedding ring left on the kitchen counter like an apology he never got to hear. The next day his head of security, a broad, quiet man named Jaiti, found nothing. Not a single camera, not a single lead. Min-ho tore through his own organization looking for a traitor and found none. He assumed in the end that she had simply left him, that the life he offered had finally become a cage she couldn't survive. He never stopped looking, but he stopped hopping. A few days later, business pulled him somewhere he never expected to find her. Baek Sung-woo had been circling Min-ho's shipping routes for over a year, a rival boss with old money, older grudges, and a hunger for territory that wasn't his. The two men had a meeting scheduled at Sung-woo's estate outside the city, a negotiation neither of them planned to honor completely. Min-ho arrived with 2 guards and a folder of numbers that would end Sung-woo's operation within the month, if the man was foolish enough to refuse the terms. He was led through the grand foyer, past marble floors and imported chandeliers, the particular gaudy wealth of a man who had money but no history behind it. And that was when he saw her. She was kneeling near the base of the staircase, a bucket of soapy water beside her, a grey uniform hanging loose over a body that had changed in ways his mind refused to process at first. Her hair was pulled back, plainer than he remembered, and her hands, the hands that used to trace the lines of his palm at night, were red and raw from work that should never have touched them. And her stomach, rounded, unmistakable, undeniable. Min-ho stopped breathing. Zara looked up at the sound of footsteps, and the moment her eyes met his, every drop of colour left her face. She did not gasp. She did not scream. She simply froze, the way a woman freezes when the ground she's been standing on for 3 years suddenly reveals itself to be a thin sheet of ice over black water. "Min-ho," she whispered. His guards exchanged a glance neither of them dared voice. Sung-woo's assistant, oblivious to the tectonic shift happening in his own foyer, cleared his throat and asked if the chairman would like refreshments while he waited. Min-ho did not answer him. He crossed the room in a way that made every guard along the wall straighten, stopping only when he stood over her, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into her face, close enough to see the small, defensive way she curved her body around the child she carried, as if she expected him to be a threat. "You're alive," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a man confirming a fact his body had already accepted before his mind caught up. "I need you to leave," Zara said, her voice shaking. "Please, right now." "Whose is that?" He didn't look away from her stomach when he said it, and something in his tone made 2 of Sung-woo's staff quietly back out of the room. Zara's chin lifted, some old defiance surfacing through the fear. "Does it matter to you?" "It matters more than anything has mattered to me in 3 years. His voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just enough for her to hear it. "Zara, look at me. Whose is that?" She didn't answer, she didn't have to. The math had already assembled itself behind his eyes, and something in his chest, something that had been locked shut since the night she disappeared, tore open all at once. Before either of them could say another word, Baek Sung-woo's voice rang out from the top of the staircase, easy and amused, the voice of a man who had no idea he was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Chairman Kang, I see you've met my newest housekeeper." If you're new here, welcome to Afrique Love Diaries, where love finds its way through fire and history refuses to stay buried. Hit subscribe now, because you will not want to miss where this goes. Sung-woo descended the stairs slowly, savoring the tension he could clearly sense but not yet understand. He was a thick, well-dressed man with a smile that never reached his eyes, and he came to a stop a few feet from Min-ho with his hands folded behind his back like a man admiring a piece of art he'd recently acquired. Found her 3 months ago, Sung-woo said conversationally, half-starved, wandering near the docks. Wouldn't say who she was running from, I took pity. Gave her work, a room, food. He glanced at Zara and something proprietary flickered across his expression that made Min-ho's hands curl slowly into fists. She's been very useful. Get out of my sight, Min-ho said to him without raising his voice, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. Sung-woo's smile faltered for the first time. Excuse me, this is my home, Chairman Kang. Not for much longer. Min-ho finally turned his head, and the look he gave Sung-woo made the older man take an involuntary step back. You've been keeping something of mine under your roof for 3 months, and you didn't think that was information worth using against me. That's the only reason you're still breathing right now. Enjoy it while it lasts. He turned back to Zara, and his voice softened so completely it was almost unrecognizable as the same man. Get up, slowly, I'm taking you home. This isn't your home to take me to, Zara said. Her voice trembling, but she let him help her to her feet anyway, her fingers curling briefly around his forearm out of instinct before she caught herself and pulled back. Then I'll build you a new one, Min-ho said, but you are not staying in this house another hour. Sung-woo's men had begun to gather at the edges of the room, uncertain, waiting for a signal that never came, because their boss understood, even through his wounded pride, that starting a war with Kang Min-ho in his own foyer, over a housekeeper was not a fight he could win. Sung-woo raised a hand to stop his men and forced his smile back into place. Take her then, he said, feigning indifference. Consider it a parting gift, Chairman Kang. I'm sure we'll discuss the shipping terms another day. We won't, Min-ho said simply, and something about the finality in his voice told everyone in that room exactly how the negotiation was going to end, and it wasn't in Sung-woo's favor. The drive back into the city was silent, except for the rain that had started against the windows, and Zara sat as far from him as the back seat allowed, her arms wrapped around herself, watching Seoul blur past like she still wasn't sure any of this was real. You left, Min-ho said finally, staring straight ahead because he wasn't sure he could look at her and keep his composure. No note, no warning. 3 years, Zara. 3 years I had my entire organization searching for a body because I couldn't accept that you'd simply chosen to go. I didn't choose anything, she said, and her voice broke on the words. I was taken. He turned to her so fast the driver flinched. Taken. 2 men grabbed me outside the academy. I don't even know who sent them. They kept me somewhere outside the city for months, some kind of leverage, I think, though nothing ever came of it. When their operation fell apart, I ran. I've been running ever since, moving from place to place, afraid that whoever took me the first time would find me again if I came back to you. Her hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against her stomach as if to steady both of them at once. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was already gone. By the time I found out, I didn't know if it was safe to come back. I didn't know if you'd even want. Don't, Min-ho said, his voice raw. Don't finish that sentence. There has never been a version of my life where I didn't want you. Do you understand me? Not one. Zara looked at him then, really looked, searching his face for the lie she'd trained herself to expect from every man since the night she vanished. She didn't find one. What she found instead nearly undid her completely, the same unguarded devotion she remembered from before, except sharpened now by 3 years of grief into something fiercer, something closer to desperation. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. I don't know how to trust anything anymore. Then don't trust it yet, Min-ho said. Just let me prove it. By the time they reached his penthouse, the storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle, and Zara stood in the entryway staring at a home that was somehow exactly as she remembered and completely unrecognizable at once. Min-ho watched her take it in, watched her hand drift unconsciously to the curve of her stomach, and felt something in his chest settle for the first time in 3 years, even as another part of him, the colder, more calculating part that ran an empire, began quietly making a list of every person who had ever touched what belonged to him. The next day, he brought in his own physician rather than risk a hospital with unknown loyalties, and stood in the doorway of the guest room he'd converted overnight into something softer, watching a woman examine Zara with careful, practiced hands. "She's healthy," the doctor said afterward, packing away her equipment. "Both of them are, but she's exhausted, malnourished, and she needs rest more than anything else right now." Min-ho nodded once, his jaw tight, and after the doctor left, he found Zara sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, looking at him like she still expected him to change his mind about all of it. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "The room, the doctor, any of it, I can find somewhere else to go once I'm stronger." "You're not going anywhere." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, the way he used to when they were newly married and he still hadn't learned to hide how much he adored her. "Zara, look at me. I am not letting you disappear from my life a second time. Whatever it costs, whoever I have to burn to keep you safe, I will do it without hesitation. I need you to understand that." Her eyes filled, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence heavier and more honest than anything either of them could have said aloud. A few days later, life inside the penthouse began to find something like a rhythm, careful and slow, two people relearning each other across a gap 3 years wide. Min-ho cancelled meetings he never would have cancelled before, choosing instead to sit with her while she ate, to walk with her along the private garden on the building's rooftop, to simply be present in a way his old self would have called weakness and his new self understood as the only thing that mattered. But peace never lasted long in Min-ho's world, and it was his cousin, Di-hyun, who ran security operations for the family, who brought the first sign that the past hadn't finished with them yet. "The men who took her 3 years ago," Di-hyun said one evening, sliding a folder across Min-ho's desk. "We finally traced the payment. It wasn't Sung-woo, it goes back further than that." Min-ho opened the folder and went very still. "My uncle." "Your uncle," Di-hyun confirmed. "It looks like he arranged it before the succession vote, hoping that if you lost her, you'd lose your focus, and the board would back him instead of you. When that didn't happen fast enough and you didn't fall apart the way he expected, he let it drop. He never counted on her escaping, or on Sung-woo finding her and keeping her as leverage he never got the chance to use." Min-ho closed the folder slowly, and the calm that settled over his face was the kind that made grown men in his organization quietly leave the room. "Say nothing to anyone. I want to handle this myself." That night, after Zara had fallen asleep against his shoulder in the low light of the living room, Min-ho sat awake for a long time, one hand resting protectively over the curve of her stomach, and made a decision he would not walk back from no matter what it cost him. If you're feeling this story so far, take a second and hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven as fast as Zara did, or would you have needed more time? By the end of the following week, Min-ho had quietly restructured half his organization's loyalties, calling in favors that had been sitting dormant for years, making sure that when he finally confronted his uncle, there would be no allies left for the man to turn to. He did not tell Zara the details. He only told her that she needed to stay close to the penthouse, that his security detail would triple, and that under no circumstances was she to go anywhere without at least 2 of his most trusted men. "You're scaring me," she admitted one evening, watching him check the locks on the terrace doors for the 3rd time that night. "What aren't you telling me?" He turned to her, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing the exhaustion and fury he'd been carrying since Di-hyun handed him that folder. "The people who took you 3 years ago, I found out who they were working for." Zara's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "Who?" "It doesn't matter who," Min-ho said, gentler now, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "It matters that it's finished. I need you to trust me on that. I have never broken a promise to you, Zara, not once in the years I've known you, and I am not starting now. You and this baby are the only things in this world I am not willing to lose again." She studied him for a long moment, and something in her finally fully released, some last knot of fear she'd been carrying since the day she was taken. "Okay," she whispered. "I trust you." The catalyst came 2 nights later, when his uncle, Kang Yi-sung, cornered by the sudden collapse of his allies and desperate to regain leverage before the truth came out publicly, made one final, reckless move. He sent 2 men to the penthouse garage, hoping to grab Zara before Min-ho could act on what he'd discovered. They never made it past the lobby. Min-ho's security had been waiting for exactly this, and within minutes both men were in custody, and Yi-sung's carefully built alibi was crumbling in real time as his own hired hands began talking to save themselves. Min-ho found out while he was upstairs with Zara, and the moment Di-hyun's call came through, Something in him went cold and still in a way she had never witnessed before. He crossed the room, cupped her face in both hands and pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay here," he said. "Do not open this door for anyone but Hyun. I will be back before morning." Min-ho. "I love you," he said, cutting off whatever fear she was about to voice, the words landing between them heavier than either of them expected. "I have loved you since the moment you spilled coffee on my report and refused to apologize for it. I am not losing you again. Not to my uncle, not to anyone. Stay here, trust me." She caught his hand before he could pull away completely, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Come back to me." "Always," he said, and then he was gone. What happened in the hours that followed became, in the following weeks, the kind of story whispered carefully through Seoul's underworld, of how Kang Min-ho walked into his uncle's estate with only Hyun and 4 men, and walked out having ended, permanently and completely, the only real threat to his family's succession in a decade. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. By the time the sun rose, Yi-sung's assets had been seized, his allies had scattered, and the man himself had been quietly, thoroughly removed from any position of influence he had ever held, his fate sealed by his own hired men's confessions. Min-ho returned to the penthouse just after dawn, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his body, and found Zara asleep in the chair by the window where she'd clearly been waiting for him most of the night. He knelt beside her and gently woke her, and the moment her eyes opened and found his face, safe and whole in front of her, she broke down completely, months of fear finally releasing all at once. "It's over," he whispered, holding her as tightly as her belly allowed. "It's finished. No one is coming for you ever again." Something shifted between them that morning, some final wall coming down, and when he carried her back to bed and lay beside her, exhausted and unwilling to let go of her hand even in sleep, it was the first night in 3 years either of them slept without fear waiting in the dark beside them. The following morning, in the golden light spilling through the penthouse windows, Zara turned to him with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself in years. "I was so afraid you'd see me differently," she admitted quietly. "Pregnant, alone, working as someone's maid, I thought you'd look at me and only see what I'd lost, not who I still was." Min-ho pulled her closer, his hand resting over the swell of her stomach where, for the first time, he felt the faintest flutter of movement beneath his palm, and something in his chest cracked wide open with a tenderness he had never known himself capable of. "I look at you," he said, his voice thick, "and I see the only home I have ever wanted. I don't care what you were wearing when I found you, Zara. I care that I found you at all." A few weeks later, in a small, private ceremony on the same rooftop garden where they had first begun relearning each other, Kang Min-ho and Zara renewed the vows that fate had once tried to erase, surrounded by the small circle of people who had stood by them through all of it, Hyun standing at his side the way he always had, steady and loyal. And months after that, in a hospital room filled with soft morning light, Min-ho held his daughter for the first time, tiny and perfect and entirely unaware of the war that had been fought to bring her safely into the world, while Zara watched him from the bed, exhausted and radiant, tears sliding freely down her face. "She has your stubbornness already," Min-ho murmured, laughing softly as the baby's small fist curled around his finger and refused to let go. "Good," Zara said, smiling through her tears. "She's going to need it growing up with you." He looked up at her then, at the woman he had once mourned as lost and now held as found forever, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that every single thing he had built, the empire, the power, the fear his name carried through the city, had only ever mattered because it led him back to this room, to this woman, to this child. "We start over," he said softly, "the 3 of us. No more running, no more hiding, just us." Zara reached for his hand, and he took it, and outside the window, Seoul glittered on, indifferent to the quiet miracle unfolding in that room. A family rebuilt from everything that had once tried to destroy it, standing now, unbreakable together. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Afrique Love Diaries and tell me in the comments, do you believe love can survive being torn apart and still find its way home? Drop your thoughts below, I read every single one. See you in the next story.